October 18, 1942, Adolf Hitler signed one of the most shocking orders of the Second World War. It was labeled Top Secret. Only 12 copies were made. The order was so extreme that German high command lawyers argued about it for days before Hitler finally gave it out. The Commando Order. From this time forward, any British commando captured anywhere in Europe or Africa was to be killed immediately. No trial, no prisoner of war camp, no Geneva Convention protections, just execution. Even if they wore proper uniforms, even if they tried to give up, even if they were wounded and helpless, German commanders who failed to carry out these killings would face court-martial under German military law. This was not a battlefield instruction. This was murder written into military policy. After the war, the Nuremberg Tribunal would declare it a clear war crime. German officers who followed it were tried, found guilty, and executed for carrying out Hitler's orders. But here is what matters. Hitler did not issue execution orders for American troops. He did not issue them for Soviet forces. He issued them specifically for British commandos. Why? Because, in 2 short years, this small force of British volunteers had accomplished something extraordinary. They had made the most powerful military machine in Europe genuinely afraid. Let me show you how Britain created the unit that terrified the Third Reich. June 1940. France had fallen. The British Army had evacuated from Dunkirk, leaving behind nearly all its equipment. Britain stood alone against Nazi Germany. The Wehrmacht occupied the entire European coastline from Norway to Spain. Hitler was preparing Operation Sea Lion, the invasion of Britain. Churchill needed a way to strike back, not with massive armies, Britain no longer had, but with small, deadly forces that could raid German positions, destroy key installations, and prove to the British people that the fight was not over. Churchill called for the creation of troops who could develop a reign of terror down enemy coasts. He wanted men of the hunter class, soldiers who could carry out what he called butcher and bolt operations. Strike hard, vanish before the enemy could respond. Lieutenant Colonel Dudley Clark proposed a solution. He had studied the Boer Commandos, who had given the British Army so much trouble in South Africa 40 years earlier. Small, mobile units operating behind enemy lines, attacking where least expected, then melting away into the countryside. Clark suggested Britain create its own commandos, volunteers from existing regiments, men who wanted to fight, not garrison duty. The name itself was deliberate, Commando. It carried implications of unconventional warfare, of soldiers who did not fight by traditional rules. The first commando units formed in June 1940. Each commando numbered roughly 500 men, divided into troops of 75. Every single man was a volunteer. You could not be assigned to the commandos, you had to request it. And the volunteers came from infantry regiments across Britain, from Scottish Highland units, from Guards battalions, even from desk jobs in London. They came because they wanted to hit back at Germany. They came because garrison duty felt like surrender. But volunteering was only the beginning. The real question was whether you could survive commando training. December 1941. Achnacarry Castle in the Scottish Highlands. This remote estate became the Commando Basic Training Center. The location was chosen specifically for its brutal conditions: freezing temperatures, mountainous terrain, miles from civilization. Volunteers arrived at Spion Bridge railway station. Their first test began immediately. A 7-mile speed march to Achnacarry Castle. Full kit, no breaks. Anyone who could not keep up was returned to unit before training even started. Those who made it found conditions deliberately harsh. They lived in unheated Nissen huts with corrugated iron walls.
They cooked their own meals. They maintained their own weapons and equipment. There were no orderlies, no special privileges for officers. Everyone trained together. The training program lasted 6 weeks. It was designed to be the most physically and mentally demanding military training in the world. Physical fitness until men could march 30 miles with full equipment without stopping. Survival training in the harshest weather Scotland could provide. Navigation by map and compass across featureless mountains in the dark. Close quarters combat. Silent killing. How to take down a sentry without making a sound. Weapons training on British, German, and captured enemy firearms. Demolitions. How to blow up bridges, railway lines, and fuel depots with minimal explosives. Amphibious assault, landing from small boats in rough seas. Cliff climbing, scaling vertical rock faces with rope and bare hands. Vehicle operation, driving trucks, motorcycles, anything they might need to steal behind enemy lines. And here is what made Aknakari different from every other military training establishment. They used live ammunition from day one. Machine guns fired over the obstacle courses. Mortars landed near the assault training. Instructors threw live grenades during combat exercises. Men died in training. The Commando Basic Training Center kept a small cemetery. The graves were visible from the training grounds. Every trainee passed them daily. The message was clear. If you could not handle live fire at Aknakari, you would not survive operations behind enemy lines. Anyone who failed any part of training was immediately returned to unit. RTU, returned to unit. Those 3 letters were more feared than any punishment. Commandos did not accept failure. If you could not meet the standard, you went back to ordinary infantry. Between 1942 and 1946, 25,000 men attempted commando training at Aknakari. Only those who passed earned the green beret, the commando flash on their shoulder, the right to call themselves Commandos. By 1942, British commandos were ready, small, elite, trained to standards no regular infantry could match. The question was whether they could actually accomplish anything against the German military machine. The Germans were about to find out.
March 4, 1941, Operation Claymore. 3 commando units raided the Lofoten Islands in Norway. The islands produced 50% of Norway's fish oil and glycerin, materials the Germans needed for explosives. The commandos destroyed factories, oil storage facilities, and fish processing plants. They sank 11 German ships totaling 18,000 tons. They captured 228 German prisoners and several Norwegian collaborators. They brought back 314 Norwegian volunteers who wanted to fight from Britain. German casualties were heavy. British casualties were 0. The commandos re-embarked and sailed home before German reinforcements could arrive. The raid sent shockwaves through German high command. How had British forces landed on occupied Norwegian territory, destroyed millions of pounds worth of German infrastructure, and vanished without a scratch? Hitler immediately ordered coastal defenses strengthened throughout Norway, but the commandos were just getting started. December 27, 1941, Operation Archery. British commandos hit Vågsøy Island in Norway. This time, the Germans were ready. The garrison included battle-hardened Gebirgsjäger mountain troops, resting after service on the Eastern Front. These were experienced combat veterans, the best Germany had. The commandos landed at dawn after a naval bombardment. Lieutenant Colonel John Durnford Slater led No. 3 Commando ashore. His second-in-command was Major Jack Churchill, Mad Jack Churchill, as the Germans would learn to call him. Churchill went ashore playing his bagpipes. He carried a Scottish broadsword strapped to his waist, a longbow and arrows slung across his back. He led the assault on the German positions while playing The March of the Cameron Men on his pipes. The German mountain troops fought back hard. They were snipers, street fighters. They knew urban combat. The battle became a vicious house-to-house fight through the narrow streets of Vågsøy town. The commandos adapted. They called in the floating reserve. They used Norwegian civilians as ammunition carriers. They cleared buildings with grenades in close-quarters combat. By mid-afternoon, every German position had been destroyed.
The Commandos demolished 4 factories, destroyed fish oil stores, ammunition dumps, and fuel supplies, wrecked the telephone exchange, captured German soldiers, brought out dozens of Norwegian volunteers. Then they withdrew to their landing craft and sailed away. German casualties, over 150 dead. British casualties, 20 killed. But the real impact was strategic. Hitler was convinced the British were preparing to invade Norway. He immediately ordered 30,000 additional troops sent to Norway, 30,000 soldiers who could not fight on the Eastern Front, could not defend France, could not reinforce North Africa, all because of one commando raid by 500 men. By 1944, 400,000 German troops were tied down in Norway, an entire army sitting in defensive positions, waiting for a British invasion that never came, all kept there because of the fear of what British commandos might do next. Think about that. Half a dozen commando raids removed 400,000 German soldiers from the war. That is more than Britain captured at El Alamein, more than the Soviets captured at Stalingrad, all kept in Norway because Hitler could not risk another commando strike. But the raid that truly enraged Hitler came on March 28, 1942, Saint-Nazaire, France. The port had the only dry dock on the Atlantic coast large enough to service the German battleship Tirpitz. If Tirpitz entered the Atlantic and was damaged, Saint-Nazaire was the only place she could go for repairs. British planners decided the dock had to be destroyed. But Saint-Nazaire was 400 miles from Britain, protected by coastal guns, naval patrols, and a large garrison. A bombing raid had failed to cause significant damage. A frontal assault would be suicide. So the British came up with a plan so audacious it bordered on madness. They would ram the dock gates with an explosive-packed destroyer, accompanied by commandos in small motor launches. The commandos would land, destroy the dock machinery, then fight their way out. HMS Campbelltown was an old American destroyer given to Britain under Lend-Lease. The British stripped off her rear funnels to make her look like a German torpedo boat. They removed her heavy guns. They packed her bow with 4.5 tons of explosives hidden in concrete and steel. Lieutenant Colonel Stephen Beatty commanded Campbelltown. Lieutenant Colonel Charles Newman commanded No. 2 Commando, 612 men in total. They knew the odds. This was almost certainly a one-way trip. March 27, 1942, the flotilla sailed from Falmouth. They crossed the English Channel, approached the Loire estuary. RAF bombers attacked Saint-Nazaire to distract the German defenses. At 3:30 in the morning on March 28, German searchlights caught the approaching ships. Campbelltown was flying a German flag. She signaled in German, claiming to be a damaged German vessel requesting permission to enter harbor. The Germans were suspicious. They opened fire. Campbelltown lowered the German flag and raised the white ensign. She increased to maximum speed, 20 knots, aimed directly at the massive dock gates. German guns fired from every direction. Shells hit Campbelltown repeatedly. The bridge was shot to pieces. Men fell dead all around Beatty, but the ship kept coming. At 3:34, Campbelltown struck the dock gates. The impact drove her bow deep into the gate structure. The ship shuddered to a stop, wedged into the dock entrance. The commandos leapt on shore. They had specific targets: pumping stations, winding houses, machinery that controlled the dock operations. They worked quickly and methodically, planting explosives while German reinforcements poured into the port. The motor launches carrying the rest of the commandos came under withering fire. The small wooden boats had no armor. German shells set them ablaze. Fuel tanks exploded, men trying to reach shore. But enough commandos made it. They destroyed their targets, blew up the northern pumping station, demolished the southern winding house, wrecked irreplaceable machinery that controlled the dock operations. Then they had to fight their way out. German forces surrounded them. The motor launches that were supposed to evacuate them were mostly sunk or burning. The commandos charged across bridges into Saint-Nazaire town, fighting through narrow streets, trying to escape. Most were killed or captured. 5 men eventually reached Spain and made it home.
Of 612 men who sailed on the raid, 228 returned to Britain. 169 were killed. 215 became prisoners of war. German casualties were far higher, over 360 dead. Most died 12 hours after the raid ended. German officers were inspecting Campbelltown. They thought the British raid had failed. The ship was stuck in the dock, but the dock was still functional. Senior officers and civilians crowded onto Campbelltown to examine her. At noon, the explosives detonated, 4.5 tons of high explosive. The blast killed everyone aboard and everyone standing nearby. It destroyed the dock gates completely, wrecked the surrounding dock infrastructure, put the entire Normandy dock out of service. The dock would not be repaired until 1948, 3 years after the war ended. The Tirpitz never entered the Atlantic. She stayed in Norwegian fjords where RAF bombers eventually found and destroyed her. For the raid, the British awarded 5 Victoria Crosses. No other single operation in the war received as many. The operation became known as the greatest raid of all. But Hitler saw something else. He saw British soldiers penetrating 400 miles into occupied France, destroying vital infrastructure, inflicting massive casualties, operating with skill and determination that terrified his commanders. And so, 7 months later, Hitler issued the Commando Order. The order was extraordinary in its scope and its illegality. It stated that British commandos behaved in a particularly brutal and underhanded manner, that they recruited criminals, that they were instructed to murder prisoners. None of this was true, but Hitler did not care about truth. He cared that his forces were afraid of British commandos. The order was explicit. Any commando encountered by German troops in Europe or Africa was to be annihilated to the last man, whether in uniform or not, whether armed or unarmed, whether fighting or surrendering. Even wounded commandos lying helpless were to be shot. The order went further. If commandos were captured and interrogated for intelligence, they could be kept alive for 24 hours. After that, they must be executed. No exceptions. German commanders were told the order was top secret. It must never fall into enemy hands. Bodies were to be buried in unmarked graves. The Red Cross was not to be informed. The executions were to be kept hidden. Several German field marshals recognized the order was illegal. Erwin Rommel refused to carry it out. He treated captured commandos as prisoners of war. But many German officers obeyed. December 1942, Operation Frankton. 10 Royal Marines in folding kayaks paddled 70 miles up the Gironde River to Bordeaux. They attached limpet mines to German cargo ships in the harbor. They damaged 6 vessels carrying vital supplies from Japan. Only 2 Marines made it home, Major Herbert Blondie Hasler and Marine Bill Sparks. The other 8 were all captured. 6 were executed under the Commando Order, shot without trial. 2 died of hypothermia during the approach. October 1942, Operation Muscatoon. British commandos destroyed a hydroelectric power station in Norway that supplied German forces. 7 commandos were captured. All 7 were taken to Sachsenhausen concentration camp and shot, the first victims of Hitler's Commando Order. November 1942, Operation Freshman. British glider troops attempted to destroy German heavy water production in Norway. The operation failed. 17 survivors were captured. All 17 were executed. October 1942. Operation Muscatoon. British commandos destroyed a hydroelectric power station in Norway. 7 commandos were captured. All 7 were taken to Sachsenhausen concentration camp and shot, the first victims of Hitler's Commando Order. November 1942, Operation Freshman. British glider troops attempted to destroy German heavy water production in Norway. The operation failed. 17 survivors were captured. All 17 were executed. March 1944. 15 American Office of Strategic Services operatives were captured in Italy. They wore proper uniforms. They were prisoners of war under the Geneva Convention. German General Anton Dossler ordered them shot under the Commando Order. After the war, Dossler was tried, convicted, and executed by firing squad for this war crime. The Commando Order was used as evidence at Nuremberg. Alfred Jodl, who distributed the order, was convicted of war crimes and hanged. Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel, who signed it, was convicted and hanged. Lower-ranking officers who carried out executions were tracked down, tried, and executed. But here is what Hitler's order tells us.
The most powerful military in Europe was so afraid of British commandos that its supreme commander ordered them murdered on sight, not because they were violating the laws of war, but because they were too effective at fighting it. Think about that. German troops fought Soviet troops on the Eastern Front. They killed millions. But Hitler never ordered captured Soviet troops automatically executed. He never ordered American troops shot on sight, only British commandos. Why? Because commandos represented something German military doctrine could not handle. Small units operating independently, striking without warning, vanishing before reinforcements arrived. German forces were trained for large-scale conventional warfare. Divisions and corps maneuvering on battlefields, proper front lines, defined objectives. British commandos ignored all of that. They appeared from the sea, destroyed their targets, disappeared before German forces could react.
German commanders could not predict where commandos would strike. Every coastal installation was vulnerable, every harbor, every airfield, every railway bridge. The entire Atlantic coast became a potential target. So Germany had to defend everywhere. That meant spreading forces thin, keeping troops in Norway when they were needed in Russia, garrisoning France when they were needed in North Africa, building coastal defenses that consumed millions of man-hours and tons of concrete, all because of a few thousand British volunteers who had passed through Aknakari Castle. The Commandos also did something else that terrified German commanders. They showed ordinary German soldiers that the Wehrmacht was not invincible, that British forces could strike at will, that no German position was truly safe. A commando raid was not like an artillery barrage or an air raid. Those were impersonal, distant. A commando raid was up close, personal. British soldiers appearing in the night, fighting hand-to-hand, destroying facilities German troops were supposed to protect, then vanishing. German troops on occupation duty knew that any night might bring commandos. They knew that if commandos came, they would kill anyone who got in their way, destroy their target, and be gone before help arrived. That psychological impact was as important as the physical destruction. And German troops learned something else about British commandos. They were not the criminals and murderers Hitler's propaganda claimed. They were professional soldiers fighting by the rules of war, even when Germany did not. There are accounts of captured commandos who, even knowing they would be executed, treated their German captors with courtesy. Of wounded commandos who shared their medical supplies with wounded Germans, of commando prisoners who refused to give up intelligence even under torture. German soldiers who fought commandos developed a grudging respect for them, even as they feared them. These were not terrorists. These were elite troops, the best Britain had, and they were very, very good at their job. By D-Day in June 1944, British commandos had evolved. They were no longer just raiding forces, they had become assault infantry, spearheading the largest amphibious landing in history. On D-Day, commandos landed on both flanks of the invasion beaches. They captured key positions, linked up with airborne forces at Pegasus Bridge, secured the port of Ouistreham, led the push inland from Sword Beach. Number 4 Commando included 177 Free French commandos. They liberated their own countrymen, fighting through Ouistreham street by street until the town was free. Lord Lovett led his commando brigade ashore, accompanied by his personal Kuiper, playing bluebonnets over the border, the same kind of psychological warfare Jack Churchill had used at Vauxhall, letting the Germans know British commandos had arrived. By the end of the war, British commandos had conducted operations in every theater: Norway, France, the Mediterranean, North Africa, Italy, Burma, and the Pacific. They had trained American Rangers in commando tactics. They had worked with French, Dutch, Belgian, Polish, and Norwegian troops at Aknakari. They had forced Germany to divert 400,000 troops to Norway. They had destroyed the only Atlantic dry dock capable of servicing Tirpitz. They had led the assault on D-Day.
They had conducted countless small raids that destroyed German infrastructure and killed thousands of enemy troops, and they had done it all as volunteers, men who could have stayed in safe garrison jobs but chose to become commandos, men who endured brutal training because they wanted to fight, men who repeatedly volunteered for operations with almost no chance of survival. The Germans feared British commandos more than any other Allied unit because commandos represented something the Wehrmacht could not defeat: British determination, British innovation, British refusal to accept that Germany was unbeatable. Every commando raid was a message: Britain is still here, Britain is still fighting, and Britain will never, ever surrender. That is why Hitler issued the Commando Order, not because British commandos violated the laws of war, but because they were winning it. And Hitler, for all his armies and all his victories, could not find a way to stop them. In the end, Hitler's Commando Order achieved nothing except to prove British moral superiority. Germany murdered prisoners. Britain treated German prisoners by Geneva Convention rules. Even after discovering the Commando Order, German officers who carried out the executions were later tried and punished. British officers who showed mercy were decorated and honored. History recorded who fought with honor and who did not. British commandos did more than win tactical victories. They proved that small units of determined, well-trained men could defeat superior numbers. They showed that courage and skill mattered more than size. They demonstrated that Britain, even standing alone in 1940, could still hurt Germany badly enough to make them afraid. The Germans feared fighting British commandos more than any other Allied unit because commandos embodied everything Germany could not match: British innovation, creating new tactics; British determination, never accepting defeat; British fairness, fighting with honor even when the enemy did not. From Churchill's call for troops of the Hunter class in June 1940 to D-Day in June 1944 to final victory in May 1945, British commandos wrote a chapter of military history that still influences special forces training worldwide. 25,000 men passed through Aknakari, thousands fought in operations, hundreds died, all volunteers, all commandos. And Germany, despite all its power, never found a way to stop them. Hitler's only answer was an illegal execution order that proved Britain was right, that in war, character matters, that moral superiority gives strength no amount of brutality can overcome. The commandos fought by the rules even when Germany did not. They showed mercy when they could. They fought with determination when they must. And they proved that Britain, in her darkest hour, could produce warriors the most powerful military in Europe genuinely feared. That is why the Germans feared British commandos more than any other Allied unit, because they recognized too late that British character was the one weapon Germany could never defeat.